She gave him everything, an education, a roof, a future. He never imagined he'd be the one to carry her now. After the accident, when she called him back into her life, it should have been simple, a nurse caring for the woman who raised him. But what began as duty slowly unravelled into something neither of them were prepared for. There are stories people tell you, and there are the ones they never dare to. This is one of those. A story not about breaking rules, but about how feelings blur where no one's watching, about what happens in silence, in gestures, in glances that last a second too long. You won't look away. You won't forget. Subscribe now so you never miss a story that dares to explore the hidden corners of the human heart. New narratives are released regularly, each one crafted to linger long after the screen fades to black. Turn on notifications and be the first to witness what others are too afraid to tell. On a quiet street in Asheville, North Carolina, where wooden houses still held the scent of fresh coffee on cold mornings, lived Dorothy, 56, unmarried, heiress to a modest fortune left by her parents who had built a chain of local shops. Her house was spacious, silent, and full of old details, stained glass windows, English porcelain, and portraits of a youth that didn't seem as distant as it truly was. Dorothy was beautiful, but not in an ordinary way. Her fair skin contrasted with her brown hair, always tied in a simple bun, and her faded blue eyes seemed to carry the secrets of many lives. Even with age and the weight of time, there was something about her that commanded respect, and at times, a subtle kind of fascination. Ethan, her nephew, was 24. Newly graduated in nursing, he had yet to experience what is expected from youth: passion, adventure, desire. He was introspective, more interested in observing life than participating in it. He had grown up under Dorothy's protective gaze, who had financed his studies after his mother, Dorothy's sister, died prematurely. Their relationship had always been marked by comfortable silences and quiet affection. He admired her. Dorothy was firm, cultured, elegant, and had never cared to marry or have children. She lived for herself and her books. Ethan saw in her a figure of authority, but also something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was gratitude, or perhaps something more confusing. Everything began to change on a November morning. A call from the hospital. Dorothy had been in a car accident. Her spine was broken. Diagnosis: paraplegia. The independence she had so carefully cultivated was now a distant memory. Ethan left his internship at a nursing home and returned to his aunt's house. The idea was just to help out for a while, but a while stretched longer. There was no direct request. Dorothy, proud as she was, would never beg, but the way she looked at him when he arrived with his backpack said everything. The first week was full of adjustments: wheelchair, home modifications, medication. Ethan handled it all with professionalism, but at night, when she was asleep, he would sit on the old couch in the living room and stare at the ceiling, trying to understand the growing discomfort inside him. It wasn't just the pain of seeing his aunt in that condition. It was something subtler. A silent discomfort when his fingers brushed hers while adjusting her in bed. The way she looked at him when he entered the room. Something was shifting between them, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Ethan had never felt desire for anyone. And now, for the first time, what was emerging wasn't a teenage crush, but a restlessness he couldn't name without feeling as if he were betraying everything he believed in. But there was no time to make sense of it. Dorothy needed him. And he would be there. Subscribing to the channel ensures you won't miss a step in this story, where the limits of care and affection are tested in silence. Everything Ethan knew about stability seemed to dissolve in that hospital waiting room, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. He arrived still in his internship uniform, and for a moment felt ashamed of his healthy body, his steady walk, his warm hands. He asked to see his aunt. He waited. A young doctor, too clinical, explained the thoracic spine fracture, the risks, the irreversible damage. When he entered the room, Dorothy was unconscious, her face still marked with dried blood and her arm in a cast. But it was her, intact in her quiet presence, even under machines and tubes. Ethan stood there for long minutes, just watching. He felt something close to anger, not at the accident, but at the fragility. How in mere seconds the world could unravel without asking permission. She woke up 2 days later. Her voice was weak, but her gaze was clear. "You came," she said without emotion, like stating an inevitable truth. He held her hand, and something tightened inside him. An invisible pact was sealed there, no oaths, no promises. She refused to see the social worker. "Family takes care. I don't need strangers." The words were firm, as if she still held control. But her thin arms, the struggle to turn her head, revealed that the autonomy that once defined her was now only a memory. The process was quick. Hospital discharge, return home, physical therapy scheduled, medical paperwork, medications arranged. Ethan took on every task with method and silence. He was a good nurse, careful, attentive, respectful. But what was growing between them wasn't in any manual. On the first night back home, he heard her crying. Not a loud sob, it was a muffled weeping, restrained, coming from the room next door. He thought about entering, but didn't. He stayed there, leaning against the hallway wall, listening to that soft, familiar pain, as if something inside him was breaking too. And it was. Dorothy wasn't crying from physical pain. She was mourning everything that wouldn't return, and maybe deep down because she knew he was there and that his presence would change everything, even the things that should never be changed. It took less than a week for Ethan to fully move in. He cleared out the guest room, turned it into a small clinic. Supplies, meds, schedules. Dorothy watched in silence, never offering advice, never objecting, but sometimes her eyes followed him longer than they needed to. Observing, memorizing. They settled into a rhythm. Mornings began with silence and soft light filtering through the lace curtains. Ethan prepared her coffee the way she liked, black, with a slice of orange peel on the saucer. He learned to anticipate her needs. She stopped asking. But with each passing day, he noticed how her vulnerability began to reshape her presence. She wasn't diminished, but transformed. The silence between them now carried another tone. Not absence, but waiting. Ethan found himself reading more. Books she recommended. Poetry, mostly. Emily Dickinson, Adrienne Rich. In the late afternoons, she asked him to read aloud. He did, his voice steady but his hands damp with something he couldn't name. Dorothy listened with her eyes closed, as if each word was both balm and burden. Sometimes after the reading, they wouldn't speak for hours, just shared presence. The quiet creaking of the house, the rhythm of breathing. He started to remember childhood afternoons in that same living room, Dorothy younger, him smaller, both of them orbiting around something tender, unspoken. Now, the past seemed to bleed into the present. She wasn't just his aunt anymore, not just a patient. She was someone who had shaped his life and was now being shaped by his care. One evening, while brushing her hair after a shower, Ethan caught her reflection in the mirror. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. The moment was brief, but something passed between them. Recognition, confusion, a shared awareness that the lines they thought clear had started to blur. He put the brush down and stepped away. But the echo of that moment stayed, all night, and into the next day. The days began to blend together. Not in monotony, but in a quiet rhythm only two people bound by duty and something unspoken could understand. Meals turned into rituals, each gesture carefully memorized. Mornings were marked by silence and the distant hum of the neighborhood waking up. Dorothy's room filled with the soft rustle of curtains, the clink of pill bottles, the rustling of blankets as Ethan adjusted her position, always gently, always attentively. Ethan started to notice the subtleties of her existence, how she held her breath before asking for help, the tight set of her jaw when he lifted her legs, the way her eyes darted toward his hands before settling on his face. He saw everything, and she watched him in ways that were not quite clinical. Sometimes he caught her eyes lingering, not just studying his movements, but absorbing him. At first, he brushed it off as projection. Then, one afternoon, while helping her into a fresh blouse, her hand briefly touched his waist, not by accident, not out of necessity, but as if testing a boundary. Neither of them acknowledged it. But it stayed. Their conversations were minimal, practical, the kind that hovered above deeper truths. But once in a while, something slipped through the cracks. "Do you still play piano?" she asked, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Not since college," he answered. "Too many people. I liked it better here." "Just you and me," she nodded. Then, after a long pause, "You always looked happiest when you were quiet." He didn't know what to say to that, but her voice lingered in his mind for days. In the late afternoons they resumed a ritual, poetry. Dorothy asked for Dickinson, then Plath. Ethan read slowly, his voice sometimes faltering over certain lines, the ones that cut too close. She'd close her eyes and listen, her face unreadable. One evening, after a particularly long session, she asked him to stay a bit longer. He sat beside her, not touching, just breathing the same air. Minutes passed. Then, without looking at him, she said, "I wonder if we'd still care for each other if things had been different." He looked at her profile, the lines of age softened by the dim light. "I don't think I'd care less," he said. Silence returned, but heavier now, denser. When he rose to leave, her hand found his wrist, not firmly, not pleading, just long enough to be remembered. Later that night, lying in bed, Ethan couldn't sleep. The quiet of the house was no longer neutral. It pulsed with something waiting, watching, and deep inside him, something responded, not in words, not in thoughts, but in the soft ache of being seen. They had not crossed any lines, not yet, but something essential had already shifted. And neither of them pretended otherwise. The attic had been locked for years. One morning, Dorothy asked for something she hadn't mentioned in decades, a box of old letters. "They're in the cedar chest," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Ethan didn't ask questions. He climbed the narrow stairs and stepped into a forgotten part of the house. Dust floated like ash in the streaks of light. The scent of dry wood and old paper clung to the air. The cedar chest was there, tucked beneath a stack of moth-eaten quilts. Inside, letters, photographs, notebooks, remnants of another version of Dorothy, one he had never met. He brought the box down. Dorothy touched the contents like relics. She didn't read aloud, but he could see in her face the silent conversations returning. Her hand lingered on a photograph, a man Ethan didn't recognize. Young, intense. "My piano teacher," she said simply. "He asked me to leave with him." "I almost did." That night, Dorothy asked Ethan to bring the box into her room. She opened the letters slowly, folding and unfolding them like origami of another life. She offered him a few to read, not to share secrets, but to tether time. He read them carefully, quietly, like he was brushing his fingers against her past. In one letter, dated 30 years earlier, the man had written, "Some part of you always held back, Dorothy. Not out of fear, but out of loyalty to something unnamed. Maybe your silence. Maybe your hunger to stay intact." She didn't comment, but Ethan felt her watching him. That night, after helping her into bed, she whispered, "We never know what our silence costs until we hear it echoed back." He sat there longer than usual, neither speaking, just breathing. The lines between past and present, between caregiver and companion, had grown thin. Everything she shared with him, memories, glances, trust, felt heavier now, as if he too had become part of that box. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. Inside, Ethan listened to the rhythm of her breath until it steadied into sleep. And still, he didn't move. It was inevitable. At some point, Ethan would have to help her bathe. She brought it up with casual detachment. "I'd rather you than someone from outside," she said. "You already know my body better than most." He nodded, quietly, professionally. But inside, something coiled. The first time, he prepared the bathroom like a surgical room, everything within reach, water warm but not too hot, towels folded. She waited in her chair, robe cinched, eyes calm, met her gaze only briefly before kneeling and beginning. He did everything right. Kept his eyes on her collarbone, the angle of her arms. She gave directions in a tone stripped of emotion, but in the steam, their silences thickened. When he helped her remove the robe, their hands brushed. She didn't flinch. Neither did he. But the air changed. He worked carefully, washing around the medical scars, the bruises, the places where the skin had grown soft. He didn't linger, yet nothing about it felt quick. She spoke once. "Do you remember when you were small and afraid of the dark?" "Yes," he answered. "You sat outside my door until I slept." "I'm not afraid," she said. "Not of this." He rinsed gently, dried her arms, her back, draped the towel like a veil. When it was done, he stepped back, heart racing, for reasons he couldn't name. She met his eyes then, steady, unsmiling. "Thank you," she said, "for making it bearable." He nodded and turned away to collect himself, breathing slowly. Nothing had happened, and everything had shifted. In the hallway mirror, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection and didn't quite recognize the man looking back. The morning after the bath was quieter than usual. And Ethan moved through the house with a kind of practiced care, as if each step might disturb something too fragile to name. He made her tea instead of coffee, left the windows closed longer, wiped the counters twice. Dorothy, for her part, didn't bring it up. She behaved as though nothing had shifted. But her eyes followed him differently now, not with expectancy or need, but with a soft, unwavering presence, as if they now carried something shared, unspoken, but undeniable. During her therapy session, she was less responsive, distracted. The therapist, a young woman with too much cheer in her voice, noted her lack of engagement. Ethan stood at the doorway, arms crossed. Dorothy didn't look at him until the session was over. "Sorry," she said later. "Some days the inside's heavier than the outside." He only nodded, but her words stayed with him, because he felt it too. That evening, the routine resumed, reading, adjusting pillows, helping her settle in. But this time, when he handed her the book of poems, she placed it on her lap and didn't open it. "I used to think loneliness was quiet," she said, "but lately I've realized it can be very loud." Ethan sat beside her, not too close. He waited. "I'm not trying to blur anything, Ethan," she continued. "I know what I am to you, what I'm not." He exhaled slowly. "I don't know what you are," he said, "and that's the part I can't ignore." Their eyes met. There was no heat, no scandal. Just two people stranded between the roles they were given and the bond they had built. Between duty and something neither of them had the courage to name. Dorothy leaned her head back and closed her eyes. "Then let's agree to nothing," she whispered. "No definitions, no promises, just presence." Ethan stayed a while longer, listened to the quiet creak of the house, the far-off hum of a neighbour's television, the slow ticking of the clock on the mantel. When he finally stood to leave, Dorothy opened her eyes again. "Good night, Ethan." He turned off the lamp. "Good night, Dorothy." Neither of them slept well that night, and neither knew if that was a comfort or a sign of what was yet to come. The days that followed stretched like a tightrope. Neither of them named the shift, but it changed how they moved through the house. They spoke less, paused more. Small interactions, a brush of hands, the brief hold of a gaze, carried too much weight to be casual, yet too little to be confronted. Ethan found himself slowing down when entering her room, as if bracing for something unscripted. Dorothy, in turn, seemed to measure her words with a new kind of care, as though anything said too lightly might collapse what they were barely holding together. In the kitchen, she watched him make toast. "You always use too much butter," she said softly. "You used to say it made things easier to swallow." She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. "I did, didn't I?" Moments like that passed like faint echoes, tender, restrained, gone too quickly. One afternoon, while folding laundry, Ethan found an old sweatshirt of his in her drawer. He held it, puzzled. When he brought it to her, Dorothy looked at it without expression. "You left it here once," she said. "It smelled like you. I didn't want it to fade." He placed it on her lap gently, didn't speak. But that night he dreamt of her, not as she was now, but as she had been in old photographs, younger, walking, laughing, and reaching for him in a way that undid something inside him. He woke with a start. The house was silent. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time before returning to sleep. The next morning she was unusually quiet during breakfast. He asked if she was in pain. She shook her head. "Not the kind you treat," she said. Later that day, as he helped her with her stretches, she surprised him. "Do you think people are allowed to love the wrong person as long as they don't act on it?" He paused. Her hand was in his, limp, vulnerable. He didn't look at her when he answered. "I think sometimes what feels wrong is just what no one else understands." Dorothy turned her face away. "That's not an answer." He adjusted her legs carefully. "No, it's not. That night, that poem they read together was about restraint, about the ache of possibility and the dignity in silence. Neither of them commented on it, but both knew it was the most honest thing spoken all day. What isn't said, Ethan thought as he closed the book, is sometimes louder than what is. There was a new kind of silence now, not of comfort or distance, but of pressure. It sat between them during meals, during the slow ritual of medication, during the soft reading of poetry in the evenings. Every movement felt rehearsed, every word overly weighed, yet neither pulled away. One rainy afternoon, while Ethan massaged Dorothy's legs as part of her routine, his hands hesitated for a second too long. She didn't move, but her breath caught. That single hitch in rhythm was enough to send a wave through both of them. He continued as if nothing had happened. But something had. Later, in the kitchen, he caught himself staring at the mug she always used, wondering what it would mean to leave, wondering what it would mean to stay, wondering if what was happening between them had already crossed into something unnameable. That night, she asked him to sit with her, not read, not talk, just sit. He pulled the chair closer to her bed. She reached for his hand, held it with no pretense. He didn't resist. "You know," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I sometimes think this house keeps secrets better than we do." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had raised him, taught him to think deeply, to care quietly. The woman who had, without asking, become the centre of his emotional gravity. "It's not the house," he said, "it's us." She didn't reply. Just let her thumb move slowly over the back of his hand. They stayed like that until the room was almost dark. No declarations, no confessions, just presence, and the thrum of everything they were not saying. As he stood to leave, she didn't let go immediately. When she did, her fingers trailed his like a closing thought. In his own room, Ethan didn't sleep. He lay awake, tracing the shape of what they were becoming. It didn't have a name, and maybe it never would. But it was real, and it was growing. The morning came with an unusual stillness. The air was cool, scented with rain-soaked earth, and the light through the windows was soft and grey. Ethan moved through the kitchen slower than usual, as if each motion had weight. Something had settled inside him overnight. Not clarity, but acceptance of the ambiguity he lived within. Dorothy requested her breakfast in the sunroom. A small change, but significant. He helped her get ready, dressed her with care, wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, and wheeled her into the light. They sat in silence, listening to the faint drip of rain from the eaves. The garden beyond the glass was lush and still. Then, without turning to him, Dorothy spoke. "I've loved 3 people in my life," she said. "One left, one never knew, and one is sitting beside me." Ethan didn't move. He felt the words ripple through him, slow and disorienting. "I don't say it to ask anything of you," she continued. "I say it because silence has cost me too much already." He looked at her then, really looked, the strength behind her fragility, the courage it took to say what couldn't be unsaid. "I don't know what this is," he said. "I just know I feel more myself here, with you, than I have anywhere else." Dorothy's smile was faint. Not victory, not relief, just truth acknowledged. "We're not wrong, Ethan," she said. "We're just out of place." They didn't speak again for a long time. The rain softened. A bird landed on the window ledge and fluttered away. The house held its breath with them. Later, as Ethan wheeled her back toward her room, he didn't touch her hand. But the space between them had changed. Somewhere between guilt and grace they had found honesty. And whether that would carry them forward or undo them entirely, neither dared ask. Not yet. If this story moved you, or made you reflect on the fragile boundaries between love, duty, and loneliness, consider subscribing. The next silence might be even louder.